Tzarayim Tovim. Our Parshat discussion this week is Parshat Noach, God's reboot and adjusting expectations. And before I begin, just a little bit of housekeeping. Next week and the following week, we will be in Israel. So I will be recording at weird times. I don't know when it will translate into American times, depending on our schedule and where we are and being out and about. But just go to my Facebook, where I'll try to get it up on my YouTube channel as soon as possible. And hopefully we will not skip a beat. So, Parshat Noach, God's reboot and adjusting expectations. From the first words of this Parsha, we are witness to God's pain and profound upset with the human being God had so lovingly and carefully crafted. We read, V'tishachat ha'aretz lifnei Elokim v'timalei ha'aretz chamas. V'yar Elokim et ha'aretz v'hinei nishchata ki hishchit kol basar etercha al ha'aretz. The earth was corrupt before God. The earth became full with chamas, with destruction, with abuses. God saw the earth, and behold, it had become corrupted, for all faith, all flesh, had corrupted its way on earth. And God says to Noach, Vayomer Elokim leNoach, Ketz kol basar ba lefanai. The end of all flesh has come before me. For the earth has become full of chamas, again that word, treachery, disruption, destruction, all of those things. And because of them, I am destroying them. V'hineni mashchitam et haaretz. I am destroying them from the earth. Now, God will do a reboot. And Noach is told exactly what to do and what to take on the ark that he will construct, who will continue to be part of the new world due to Noach's righteousness, as explained in the very first verse. Ele toldot Noach, Noach ish tzadik tamim haya b'dortav et Elokim hitalech Noach. These are the generations of Noach. Noach was an ish tzadik tamim, a perfectly righteous individual. For in his generation, he walked with God. Hitalech et Hashem. Notice the explanation of why Noach was all that he was in God's eyes. The idea of perfect here, tamim, is also tam, as in, for example, the being simple, being perfect in simplicity, not being complex, not being conflicted, all of that. Because Noach followed God completely and did what God wanted him to do, that was all he needed to know. And in that respect, hu haya ish tzadik tamim. Proof of this connection is indicated here as the reading continues. V'ya'as Noach k'chol asher tziva oto Elokim kein asa. And notice the repetition. For Noach did everything that God commanded him to do, so he did. As our reading continues, we learn exactly how severe this flood would be. We are told, and all flesh perished. Vayikva, yikva is perished, completely gone, that moved upon the earth. The fowl, the cattle, the beasts, everything that was on the earth was destroyed. B'chol asher nishmat ruach, referring back to chapter 2, verse 7, when we are given nishmat chayim, the breath of life, and we become the nefesh chaya, the human being, the living, human, breathing person. Everything that had the breath of life in it, be'apiv, in its nose, again, referencing chapter 2, verse 7 of Bereshit, everything died. As we saw in last week's Parsha, in that verse, chapter 2, verse 7, Vayitzar tu yodim, Hashem Elokim, both aspects of God, et ha'adam, the earthling, afar min adama, dust from the earth, vayipach ba'apiv nishmat chayim, exactly the same words that are used here. Vayihi ha'adam lenefesh chaya, and the human being became soul, a conscience, all those things that we associate with being human. Then this created one, who was to bring God into the world by their very breath that had been breathed into their nose, corrupted it instead to the point that everything was beyond repair in God's eyes. So Noach has chosen to facilitate the reboot that God hopefully will institute to avoid the corruption and destruction that has already become prevalent as part of our narrative. The ark is built, the flood occurs, and it's completed, and then we read about the continuation of Noach's life. And in his life, things do not go so well later. Noach goes out, his sons are with him, his wife is with him, his sons' wives. Everything that came with them onto the ark, onto the teva, comes out. And then Noach builds an altar to God. He takes all the clean animals of the clean fowl, and we're told that this hints to what kashrut is when he takes one pair of all the non-kosher animals, as we now know them, and then 7 pairs of those that are. And God smelled the pleasant aroma, and God says, I will no longer curse the earth, lo osif v'kalel od adama, the land adama, from which Adam, the earthling, evolves, because of man, ba'avor ha'adam. Ki yatzer lev ha'adam, because the imagination of man's heart is ra, is potentially bad or evil from his youth, and I will no longer smite all living things. And this is a promise that God makes. This is God adjusting God's expectations and what his intentions were originally. So several pivotal occurrences confront us here. 1, notice that Noach is sacrificing animals. In giving a nod to kashrut as we know it, and the designation of clean animals for the purposes of our use, we learn in Bereshit Rabbah 34:9, the Holy One, blessed be God, commanded me to take in 7 pairs of those that are permitted in order to offer a sacrifice for them. Secondly, Rashi teaches regarding verse 21, in which we are told that God smells the pleasant aroma, and God says, I will no longer curse the earth because of the human being, for from his youth, again, Yitzar, given the Yetzar Tov and the Yetzar Ra, the good inclination, the bad inclination, it's always part of who we are, and we have to overcome it. So from his youth, it's written without a vav, ketiv chaser, mina urav. So the verb that's used, the vowel that's used does not include the vav, and it's a ketiv chaser, indicating that the person is created from his youth, not fully formed. While we have this ketiv chaser here, this stands in counter-distinction to the double yodim from verse 7 in chapter 2. God's hopes that man, that the human being, that the earthling that becomes the soul would have the good inclination and bad inclination and know what to do with it. And then here we're getting a different message that from the human being's youth, the Yetzer Hara, unfortunately, will eclipse too often the Yetzer Tov. Here, Rashi and many other of our Meforshim suggest that these 2 Yodim do in fact represent the Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov, and Rav Kook amplifies this notion when he sets forth the idea that sacrificing and permitted use of these animals for these and other purposes, namely consumption in terms of kashrut, is a way to accommodate the natural animal instinct of the human being to hurt, to kill, to have power over, and so forth. A good friend of mine from my cage days many years ago, for those of you who are listening to this who come from that, and I see that one is at this present point. Hi. Jonathan Wolf started this wonderful organization called Jewish Vegetarians of America, and the idea was that vegetarianism is actually a higher part or a higher level of kashrut, because being given the permission to eat meat was actually an accommodation to try to take away a little bit of that evil inclination. So we look at things that we take for granted and we forget the process in which all of this happened, which our annual reading of our Torah, specifically where we are right now, reminds us of how we got to be here. The idea was that if the human being could eat meat, that their need for violence and such would be kind of satisfied, and then they could work better with others to create a kinder and more proper world along the lines of what God had envisioned. Vayitzar et ha'adam. And God created the human being, the two yodim, with the Yetzer Tov, the Yetzer Hara, with the idea that hopefully man, the human being, will move toward the Yetzer Tov. This dialectic of how things were supposed to be, and then how they evolved to be given the reality of the human condition, has been discussed on many occasions, and will be one of the main foci of these Parshat discussions during this coming year. Third and last, going back to what we learn in these verses, chapter 8, verses 18 to 21, notice God's realization for the needs for such accommodation and pivots as we come to understand the pain and acceding to the reality in these words that are explained. God looks at this. God says in God's heart, Lo asof l'kalel, I will not continue to curse the ground. I will not continue to curse Adama ba'avor ha'adam, for the human being that came from the ground, because God created this heart of the human being, and that eventually, hopefully, God's ideation and the reality of the human being will come together. At this point, further instructions are provided to structure and limit the agency of the human being in this reboot. We learn in the next chapter, verse 3, every moving thing that lives will be given yours to eat. Like the green vegetation, I have given you everything. And here in Sanhedrin 59b, we learn because originally we were supposed to be vegetarians. And we had everything that we needed to survive and thrive. But flesh, and here's yet another accommodation. Yes, they will eat meat. Af basar b'nafsho damo lo tochlu. You will not eat the blood of the flesh. Now, of course, when we buy meat, it's koshered, it's done. But those of us who remember the salting and the rinsing and the salting and the rinsing know that we had to actually get the blood out of the meat years ago. Now, of course, our kosher butchers and the rabbis who supervise them don't trust us to do that, but it does make it easier. So it then says, we're taught in our portion, but the blood of your souls, v'afet damchem l'nafshetechem, I will demand an account from. In other words, you do not kill, you do not hurt, you do not abuse. I have permitted, according to Breshit Rabbah, you to take the life of animals. But for your blood, as human beings, I will demand of one who sheds one's blood, I will demand retribution, both for one who sheds the blood of another, and also me'ashofek dam atzmo. We from this we come to a very difficult reality, and that is those that die by suicide. So there's limits here. Notice how these limits are articulated and how the world is promised. Then the human being comes in with their realities and their limitations, and then God adjusts. This is a nod to later teachings about killing, unintentionally, bishkaga versus intentionally, bizadon, spilling blood, and this need for total accountability, much more developed than what we saw last week with Cain and Hevel. These instructions and their need has already been established given the narrative of these two. Because we saw that there was murder, and we saw that we need to know about this. So, we read in verse 6, Shapfach dam ha'adam ba'adam damo yeshafech ki b'tzelem Elokim asat adam. A human being who sheds the blood of a human being, of another human being or themselves, there will be retribution. In the case of someone who sheds another's blood, they will be killed if it's intentionally. Why? Because in the image of God, the human being was made. And as the image of God, we are to acknowledge that God is in each one of us, which creates all kinds of interesting dynamics vis-a-vis, for example, war. where it's mandated. I am presently learning through Mishnah Torah, Hilchot Rotzeach Shmor Nafshot, the laws of murder and protecting human beings. We know that we're in a situation right now where people are being killed, and how do we do the calculus that allows us to reconcile these very conflicting pieces of our life? And we have many, many, many rules and laws and regulations that actually structure this specifically because it's needed. Right after this verse, notice the connection. Verse 6, whoever sheds the blood of a human being, of another person, his blood will be shed by a human being. And of course, those of you that know about the Arei Miklat, the cities of refuge, for those who killed by accident, that's part of this very long epistle of the various laws and practices that are entailed. But we do this because the human being is made in the image of God. Right after that verse, we read, and you will be fruitful and multiply, swarm upon the earth and multiply therein. These two verses are pivotal to understanding our role as human beings as envisioned by God. We do not take another life, we bring life into the world. It's so interesting that they are set here in juxtaposition. You are to live and bring others to life. That is your mission. Now, once this connection has been made, we have a reminder that God is always present, and remembering that this is a reboot, there are adjustments both for God and for humanity. So here, a few verses later, we learn at Kashti Natati Ba'anan, I've placed my rainbow in the cloud, and it will be a sign of this covenant. Do not kill. Bring life into the world. And it will come to be that when you see the rainbow, you will remember the covenant I've made with you. And God will remember the covenant which is between God and us. God then says to Noach, Vayomer Elokim el Noach, Zot oti ot habrit. This is the sign. This is kind of my signature regarding the covenant. Asher hakimoti beni ovem kol basar asher haaretz, that I've made between me uben kol basar asher haaretz, and every human being, every flesh being on the earth. Again, we need to remember, we have not yet started the Jewish story. This is the human story. And it says, Kol basar asher ala aretz. Every human being is made in the image of God. What pains me so much when I look at the conflict and the vitriol and the hatred that is in our world, that I spend way too much of my professional time addressing and trying to maintain some sense of sanity, is that people forget this most basic teaching of our Torah, which also, of course, is the Christian Bible, in terms of we're using the same text, and that this sign is here to remind us that we must be concerned not just about our own group, not just our own personal collective, avol, beini uven kol basar asher ala aretz, between me and between every human being on the earth. A word of application for my friends, colleagues, partners in specifically the more religiously observant Jewish community. I've been called many names because of positions I have taken about human justice and about being concerned about all lives. For those of you that read my writing in the Times of Israel about the multiple truths I hold, my dedication to Israel, my conviction that all human life must be protected, my feelings that many of our governments need to do better in remembering that, including Israel, my feeling that we are forgetting the foundational elements that make us people of faith, And we are using that faith in some ways to pound other people over the head in a way that is really a desecration of that faith. As all humanity does today and will do, Noach at this point will go on to disappoint, showing his true frailty as a human being. What does he do? V'yachel Noach ish adama v'yita kerem. And Noach began to be an ish adama, a man of the earth. Remember Cain and Abel? Person of the earth, tilling the soil. V'yita kerem, and he plants a kerem, a vineyard. Wine is the one drink that has more rules about sanctification in Jewish life. It is used to sanctify in many faiths, not Islam. Muslims do not drink. You know that. And what happens? Vayasht min hayayin, vayishkar, v'yigal b'toch ohala. He drinks the wine, he becomes drunk, and he basically walks around his tent naked. So he begins doing well, conforming to God's aspirations, ish tzaddik tamim, right? However, that tricky evil inclination that comes with us from our youth pops up again, and he abuses the fruit of the land, becomes drunk, and then there is a horrific set of sequences that is clearly bothersome to all of us, culminating with punishment for yet another fail from set expectations. After we move on from Noach, we end with the story of Migdal Bavel, with cooperation between people that we have not seen up to this moment. But here again, there will be serious missteps. After we've read about these generations and how things have sort of branched out, we read, all of the earth was of one language and uniform words. Sounds great, right? No. As I often say, unity does not mean everybody agrees. Safe spaces and living together and building community makes room for disagreement and disparate ideas. That's unity. If we can pull all of our differences together and coexist, respecting and celebrating what we share and being realistic and understanding where we differ. So it comes to pass that they travel from the east and they find a valley in the land of Shinar and they settle there. And they said to each other, V'yomru ish al re'uhu, Havan yobana lebanim, v'nisrafa l'sreifa v'tihi lahem, havanat even, akmar haya lahem l'chomer. V'yomru havan ivne lanu ir, u'migdal u'rosho b'shamayim, v'naseh lanu shem, pen nafutz al penei kol haaretz. They said to one another, come on, we're going to make bricks. We're going to fire them. We're going to do all this. We're going to become the most powerful construction company ever. And then they say, what are we going to do with this? Nivneh lanu ir. We're going to build for ourselves a city. Umugdal urosho b'shamayim. And its top, its head, its tower will have its top in the heavens. We will make a name for ourselves. And then we will not be scattered through the earth. But if we are, we're part of this one people. Now here, it may look good on the surface, but we have another abuse. Uniting together not to be better people per se, but rather, as we see here, to make a name above and beyond God, to claim power of their own, is not the noble goal. Again, we are left with disappointment and yet another reboot, this time with a proliferation of languages to disallow such extended and unchecked hubris in the future. Solve that problem, check, move on, new problem. That problem, move on, check. God is clearly disappointed. But God made a promise. The human being has clearly failed, but has also made some progress. I want to conclude with a lovely teaching by Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Zichrona L'Shalom, for some perspective. He focuses on one verse within the instructions of how to construct an art. It says in Reshit 6, verse 16, Sohar ta'aseh l'teva. You should make a skylight for the ark, and you should finish it to the top. And the entrance of the ark should be on its side. Upetach hateva b'tzada. You will make bottom compartments, second-story compartments, and third-story compartments. There's a difficulty understanding what the word sahar means, since the word does not appear anywhere else in the Tanakh. Everyone agrees, given the context of the pasuk, that it is referring to some source of illumination. It will provide light in the teva itself. But what exactly is it? Rashi quotes a midrash in which two rabbis disagree as its meaning. Rashi teaches, some say this was a window. Others say that it was a precious stone that gave light to them. The precious stone had the miraculous quality of being able to generate light within the darkness. Bartonora suggests that what is at stake between the two interpretations is the etymology of the word sahar itself. One relates it to the word saharayim, midday. In that case, the brightness was to come from the sun, the sky, the window, the outside. Therefore, sahar here means a window, a skylight. The other view is that saharit relates to zohar, radiance, which suggests something that radiates its own light by its own power, hence the idea of a miraculous precious stone, be it opaque or transparent. Chizkuni and others suggest that Noach had both, a window, because remember, that's where he released the raven from, and some form of artificial lighting for the prolonged period of the flood itself, when the sun would be completely overcast by cloud and the world would be shrouded in darkness. It remains fascinating to ask why the rabbis of the Midrash and Rashi himself, continues Rabbi Sachs, would spend time on a question that has no practical relevance. There will be, God promised this in this week's Parsha, no further flood that will destroy the entire world. There will be no new Noach, Shayat Tzaddik Tamim. In any future threat to the existence of the planet, an ark floating on the water will not be sufficient to save humankind. So why would it matter which source of illumination Noach had in the ark during these tempestuous days? What is the lesson for us, for all of our generations? Rabbi Sachs leaves us at a question. I would like to suggest an answer or an approach, because we all know there are many answers. No matter how dark our situation is, no matter how disappointed God is in us, or we in ourselves, or we in God, dare I say, there's always a light within. We may not know its source. We may not be able to identify or point to its exact location or type, but it is there. I think this is what we call our hashkafa pratit, the piece of us that knows, no matter what happens, we are joined to God. That soul is in us, always present, always searching, aware of the Yetzer Hara, aware of the Yetzer Tov, trying to point us in the direction of the Yetzer Tov, knowing fully well that we will backslide and go in the direction of the Yetzer Hara. We know this, and God comes to know this. We may not always use that inner light for its best intended purposes, but we always know we can access it. It is that window through which God sees us, and we perceive God, so that we are always in each other's presence. That is our Sahar. That is in the Aron, in the Teva. Sahar Taseh La Teva. That is our Sahar. May we all continue to learn to use it more effectively. Never lose faith that it is there. And remember that as we go on and we meet new challenges, we will have to adjust our expectations because we are made B'Tselem Elohim, and God is doing that as well. Shabbat Shalom to all. And the next 2 weeks you will see me with a different backdrop. 1 week I'll be coming to you from Yerushalayim and 1 week from Tel Aviv. Kol Tuv. Have a good week. Shabbat Shalom. Li'itrat.